Hello and welcome to my lesson on talking about writing for end users as we progress through our lectures on being best help desk software and technical support representatives that we can possibly be. So in this series we are going through many different modules, and in this one we're talking about our technical writing for end users. And in this lecture we're going to introduce to technical writing, where we will learn about the organization of technical documentations, the technical writing process, those common pitfalls that we try to avoid, as well as various tools that are used in technical writing. There are several different objectives we want to try to complete, and I'll highlight those areas now. You can see I have those listed now. Types of end user documentation that we might see or even complete, how technical writing differs from other writing, how technical documents are organized, how to plan effective user documents, the technical writing process, effective use of formats, strategies for technical writing, common problems that we see in technical writing, those various tools that are used for completing our technical writing, and then how to evaluate our documents. First, let's take a look at the different types of end user documentation that we will come across as help desk tech supports. Brochures, flyers, we also have newsletters, handouts, training ads or aids that we may create or have to come across. Another type of end user documentation are definitely user guides, handbooks, user manuals. We also have online help systems and the use of hyperlinks. Make sure you know how to use hyperlinks when you're creating documents in help desk systems. We also will come across email, chat, and text messages. Other end-user documentation will come across our web pages, whether it be extranet or intranet pages. We also have proposals. We'll have various business letters and memos. Definitely know how to write a proper business memo. Some of the other end-user documentation will be things such as procedural and operational documentation, as well as a very important tool in help desk and technology support, and that is troubleshooting guides. The next thing we'll talk about now is how technical writing differs from other writing. Now when we take a look at that, there are several differences, and those differences are going to be in the goals of technical writing. We're going to have different goals than what just general writing is. If we're just writing like a paper on some type of topic, that's very different than the goals that we may have for our end user documentation for creating our professional documentations. We need to have different skills when it comes to that. It is imperative as your IT customer support, usually the front line support, need to have effective writing skills for our end users and keep them in mind when you're thinking about how this technical writing differs from other writing. The organization of the document is going to be different as well. The type of information that's going to be communicated to end users is going to be different than a different type of writing. And make sure that you're using the proper writing style when you're doing technical writing. Now let's take a look at how our technical documents are organized. When it comes to technical documents, you need to know the difference between types of organization. Sequential organization follows a step-by-step sequence from the first item to the last. Now an example of this sequential organization is with the instructions for installation of maybe a piece of hardware or a piece of software, and you have those step-by-step instructions that you need to complete in a proper sequence. And the other is an hierarchical organization. This is where your information flows from top to bottom, as well as from general to specific information. An example for hierarchical organization and how you organize that document is an example of like an online help system, from top to bottom, or from a general idea to very specific information. The next area that we'll cover is how to plan effective user documents. Now there are certain things to know when planning for your effective user documents. If your document's not going to be effective, then it's a waste of not only your time, but the end user's time and effort that they put into it as well. So when you're planning for your documents to be effective, keep some key things in mind. Ask yourself, who is the target audience that will be the end user for this document? Another question is, what does the audience already know? Maybe you're writing to a specific group, maybe within your own IT group, so they should already know certain things, so there's no need to include that in that writing or in that document. The next obvious question is, well, what does the audience need to know? Well, if they need to know how to, successfully install a network printer, well, then they don't need to know how to log into the machine. So keep the information in mind, what they might know or what they already know, as well as what do they need to know. Another question or thing that makes sure to know is, what do you want the audience to be able to do when they have finished reading the document? If they're installing a network printer, obviously you want the audience to be able to print a document to that network printer successfully. And lastly, what medium will be used to transmit the document to the audience or to that intended audience? If it's going to be an electronic document, do you necessarily need different color of print of your font? If it's going to be something printed, do we need to be able to have it binded so that it is a document, or is this something that can be done in an email? So know what medium you're going to be used to transmitting that final technical document to your intended audience. Next, we will take a look at effective use of formats. If your document has varying formats, if you're not consistent with your formats, that can definitely throw off the users. You want to make sure that you're including a format consistency. So make sure to check that and not to be jumping around with different types of formats. Make sure if you are doing a email, you're using the proper format for an email, and memo, use the proper format for emails. Formats can be interpreted many different ways. The use of templates in your word processing programs or your design programs can be very useful in utilizing those, so that you are making sure that your formatting is very effective to the user. So just make sure that your style elements are consistent. You're very consistent in the rest of your formatting, and if needed, use some pre-formatted templates if they are applicable to your use. Now, the next thing we'll talk about is strategies for technical writing. And when it comes to this, there are different things that we should make sure or to use, like the use of analogies. Maybe the use of analogies is not the best in some instances, but in some other instances, when you're trying to get a user to be able to relate to something that they may be able to relate to on a less technical level, that might be a great use for analogies. The use of analogies can just be a very simple way to explain new material to our users. And remember, an analogy is just really a comparison between an unfamiliar concept, something new, and a familiar one. So by using that analogy, you can create the understanding a lot easier than just trying to keep repeating the same thing over and over again, which is where we get into repetition. A lot of times, though, when it comes to technical writing, we use repetition for an emphasis mode. And this is just kind of a training strategy that we use to help people learn. When we use repetition, we pretty much follow the three same steps. We introduce the concept, we explain the concept, then we summarize. If we need to do it again, we follow that same pattern. Introduce, explain, summarize. Another strategy for technical writing is consistent word use. Use a consistent word to refer to each concept. Don't vary your word uses, like if you're talking about a USB drive, one time referring to that as USB drive, another time referring to it as a thumb drive, the next time a flash drive, etc., etc. We know they have lots of different terms. Make sure that you're consistent in your technical writing so that there's no room for any type of confusion. Sometimes you may work in an organization that uses what's called a style sheet, and this style sheet is just a quick reference guide for using common terms and what term is acceptable in the organization. And the reason for this is just as you thought, for making sure that we are using consistent terminology. One last area in the strategies for technical writing I want to address is consistent verb tense. You'll find this a bad practice in a lot of places where the verb tense is not consistent. Best practice is the preference of the present tense unless there are some events that clearly occurred in the past. Always try to write things in the present tense when you're doing your technical writing. This will make life a lot more simple for both you and the end user. Next, let's talk about common problems in technical writing. There are a lot. I will not talk about every single one, but I will definitely address several. You want to avoid the use of clutter in your technical writing. Effectively use graphics only if it's to highlight a point, not just for some decoration to make your work look better. And this happens a lot. When you're using alignments, left align work is probably the best preference over block, justified, or center, because some of those can be hard to read. We're used to reading left align. Avoid inappropriate typefaces. Know the difference between the different typefaces, such as what's a serif typeface, what's sans serif, what's some type of specialty typefaces. Make sure that you're using those that are most commonly used. Avoid gender-related words unless it clearly fits. So the use of gender-neutral language is very important. Be careful with unclear reference. And reference are just words or concepts that are designed by or designated by another word. Such words such as it, them, this. Make sure if you're using these reference that the reader knows exactly where this referent term is pointing to. If you use this in a sentence, these are maybe questioning, well, who is this? What is this? What does this refer to? Make sure you avoid that. Also avoid passive voice. Use active voice instead. Next, we'll talk about nominalization. And this is the use of using like shun or ing or meant at the end of a word. And this is where we are going to create a noun where a verb would be easier to understand. So be careful of that. An example of this is you say perform an installation of the print driver. Well, instead, just use a simple verb rather than nominalization. Say, instead of perform an installation of the print driver, instead just simply say, install the print driver. There's no confusion there, and we haven't taken and changed the way that the word is used. Next, avoid wordiness. And this can be very hard to do sometimes because you feel like you have so much information to share. But definitely avoid that at all possible, because if it's wordy, if you're using unnecessary words, it's not going to be as effective of writing. Avoid jargon, and in the IT world this is hard to do sometimes, but just know your audience and the intended level. Try to use words that anyone can understand, not just those that are for those that are experienced in the field. If you use jargon, you must define the term before using it anywhere. If you're going to use, let's say, Universal Serial Bus, USB, make sure you define that early on. Don't use idioms, a word which is just a word or a paraphrase whose meaning is different from the literal meaning if those words were separated. Do not use dangling phrases. This irks me. A word or phrase at the beginning or end of a sentence that adds very little to the meaning is a dangling phrase. Here's a prime example. An example will say, needless to say, or ending a sentence with the word so. If you start out a sentence with needless to say, that is a dangling phrase. If you end your sentence, whether it's written or oral, with the word so, that is a dangling phrase. Now let's move on to talk about tools that are used for technical writing. One of those I'll start out with is an outline tool used to help organize your work. Now, a lot of these tools that I'm going to mention are definitely available in whatever word processing program you're using, such as Microsoft Word, or maybe you're using Google Docs. You may not find everything in one package, but you will definitely find most of these in the more well-known word processing programs. As I said, use an outlining tool to help organize your work. Another tool used is the spell checker, and if you've never used a spell checker, then I applaud you, but I am very glad to have that set to automatically check and to identify and correct spelling errors in my work. There's also the custom dictionary to help check for the spelling of words that we may consider jargon or acronyms, initialisms, and different technical terms. Another very, very helpful tool for technical writing is the Tharsis. This is going to help find a word that clearly expresses a concept and help you use different words rather than the same word every time. But if need be, because of the type of writing you're doing, make sure that you are consistent in the word and not just finding 5 different ways of using the same meaning of a word. The grammar checker, make sure to use that, and this is to recommend changes in the wording to improve the readability of your technical writing. There's also a thing that you may not have ever used before. This is called the readability index, and this measures the level of difficulty of the text in your writing. And one of the last tools I'll talk about is desktop publishing features. These are used to help writers produce professional looking documents. If you want to look more into desktop publishing features, you can do some research for that online. The last area that we'll talk about is how to evaluate documents. There are really 4 general criteria that can be used, and that's content, organization, format, and mechanics. When evaluating documents or how to evaluate documents in the content area, ask yourself, is the information relevant? If it's not relevant, then it should not be part of the content of your document. Ask yourself, is the information timely and accurate? If the information is more than 3 years old, is it really reliable? And is the coverage of the topic complete? Did you completely cover the main topic that you were wanting to write about? That is one of the 4 criteria for evaluating your document. Another one is organization. We have some questions here we can ask as well. Is the information easy to locate in the paper or the work? Are transitions between topics identifiable? Transitional statements are extremely critical in technical documentation or technical writing. And lastly, when we're in the organization criteria, can readers get in and out quickly with the answers they need? Now, when it comes to format as a criteria for evaluating documents, a couple questions you might ask are, does the layout help guide the reader? This, you might say that, oh, isn't that organization? But think about it, we're actually talking about the layout, the format that you used for the technical writing. And lastly, is the format consistent? I know you've heard that several times from me, but that is very critical in technical writing. And the last general criteria when evaluating documents is the mechanics. So are words spelled correctly? That's one of those reasons why we use those tools for technical writing. Same way as, is it grammatically correct? And is the writing style effective? If it's not effective, it's time to look at the mechanics and start over. That is it for this brief lesson on writing for end users. I hope you found the information helpful and making sure that your technical writing skills are improving and up to par for your organization and, most importantly, your end users. Thank you for following along. Have a great day.